morning. It's Tuesday, February 16, 2016, and this is your morning edition on i24 News. Coming up later today, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu hits a surprising hurdle in Israel's Supreme Court, calling on the government to legislate controversial clauses in the much-maligned natural gas outline. As the war in Syria continues to escalate, President Assad says that a ceasefire does not mean that parties will stop using weapons. And later on in the show, the highlights from the music industry's biggest night, the Grammy Awards, with some musical guests here in studio. Good morning, I'm Meredith Ross, and we start the day with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who became the first prime minister to appear before the Supreme Court in an attempt to persuade it to reject submissions aimed to stop the government's controversial plan for Israel's natural gas. Netanyahu gave a speech in court stressing the importance of the outline, but was not cross-examined nor asked a single question. This highly irregular move from Netanyahu comes after a year of such steps, including firing ministers and regulators who opposed his outline and warned it creates Israel's biggest monopoly ever, handing out the country's largest natural treasure to the local oil tycoon Yitzhak Teshuvah and the American gas conglomerate Noble Energy. Everything seems set for the removal of the last hurdle facing Netanyahu on his way to pass the outline, but in a surprise move, the Supreme Court suggested the government will legislate the Stability Clause, a clause barring future Israeli governments from regulating the gas monopoly for at least 10 years. And now with gas prices dropping at an all-time low, is this the final nail in Israel's gas outline coffin, or will Netanyahu keep on pushing it regardless of resistance? With me in studio today are various experts to debate this ongoing battle, including Boaz, Arad, manager of the i24 Institute in Israel. Good morning to you, Boaz. Amir Foster, a consultant for gas companies. Good morning, Amir. Good morning. Ariella Berger from the Israeli Institute of Economic Planning and Research. Thank you very much for joining us. And researcher Amnon from the Chazan Center at the Van Leer Jerusalem Institute. Thank you very much for being here as well. But before we get brawling, let's watch the following report and we'll take it from there.
This agreement will bring in hundreds of billions of shekels to Israeli citizens over the coming years.
Earlier this week, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu became the first sitting Israeli leader to personally appear before the country's Supreme Court. He came to defend a contentious natural gas deal. Netanyahu told the five-justice panel, "We are in the 19th last minute in terms of our ability to realize the potential of the state of Israel's gas. Every additional delay could lead to grave results, and it is doubtful if we could recover from them." Israel has been trying to extract offshore gas since the discovery of the Tamar and Leviathan fields in 2009 and 2010. Currently, only the Tamar field west of the port of Haifa is in production, but the far larger Leviathan, estimated at 18.9 trillion cubic feet of natural gas, has been hit by a series of delays. Critics say the deal between the Israeli government and a consortium, including U.S. firm Noble Energy, pushed forward by Netanyahu, overly favors the firms involved. They argue that depending on a single consortium of backers carries the risk of a monopoly. On December 17th, Netanyahu signed a new deal with the companies, having agreed to sell some of their other assets as part of the accord, despite the pact being in fact a violation of their previous agreements with the state.
The gas that will flow into Israel will be used to help decrease the cost of living, because gas is a significantly cheaper energy means than other energies.
Supreme Court approval of the Leviathan deal would allow the consortium to move forward on contracts for gas sales, including intent to export the gas to other countries in the region, which could grant Israel strategic leverage.
So, Ariella, we'll begin with you this morning. It was the first time a prime minister appeared in Supreme Court to testify for any sort of legislation. So just talk about the significance of that and what happened yesterday.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the significance goes back actually to around December last year when the oil price first went down. And that's when the first unusual events happened, starting with the events that led to the antitrust commissioner standing down and the pushing forward of this framework agreement. the Prime Minister standing in front of the Supreme Court, I think it's correct what you're saying, it's highly unusual. I should emphasize, I think he was also standing both as Prime Minister and both as Minister of the Economy. And it also follows his appearance at the Knesset Economics Committee at the end of last year, all showing that the government is very strongly supporting this framework agreement, but it's a very controversial agreement for the Israeli consumer and for the industry as a whole, I'd say. Very unusual.
And Amir, just break down why it's so controversial for people who aren't so familiar with the issue.
Okay, it's a bit because that we have only one player today in Israel. It's Tamar Gas Reserve,
Right.
Tamar's partnership, and the owners of Tamar and the owners of Leviathan is the other big gas reserve that we have. Mostly the same owners. So a lot of the protest or the people in the public said it's monopoly. So we wanted to break it. But the condition in the market in Israel today is quite good. The tax is high, and actually in the outline there is some kind of price control. So the prices can't really have big changes, both sizes actually. So the monopoly don't have the power of real monopoly.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, just to pick up on what you said, I don't think it's so much that the public thinks that there's a monopoly. I think the controversy was more that the Antitrust Commissioner, who's the regulator whose reason of being is protect the public interest, already said that there was a suspicion of a monopoly and then came out with a decision that it's a monopoly and the monopoly causes harm to the consumer. Because the monopolies in themselves aren't illegal. It's when they cause consumer harm. So the decision that he came out with, I think you'll agree with me, this is actually, it's more that the Antitrust Commissioner said that there's a monopoly rather than the public. And that's really what's causing the problem, you see, because the gas price is falling globally, and the outline fixes the gas price really quite relatively high.
It's not
split
the outline.
monopoly
It's
for
the
7 to 10
contract.
years.
It's the contract that that Tamar partnership have with the electricity company. It's not the outline that making the prices.
Well, the price mechanism wasn't set before the outline. It was open. It could have been a regulated price, or it could have been a market-defined price. So I think it's because the outline...
It was regulated by the electricity authority. We need to remember
The final
that the
mechanism was not
electricity
decided.
authority wanted that the prices will linked to
May I give a general view on
Yes,
it,
Boaz, I
because
would like to hear
getting
from you
into
as
all
well.
the detail, I think, mix a lot of people.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to quote Judge Robert Bork that says about the Israeli legal system that the Israelis have less and less reason to go to election and choose their elected government, since everything is decided on high court. And this is part of the Israeli judicial activism, which we see right now in action. We have to remember that the elected government chooses certain decisions. I don't agree with these decisions. I think that there is a deep misunderstanding in regard to monopolies and in regard to resource in Israel. First of all, the idea that monopoly is hurting the public is never applied to the public market. We have a huge monopolies, and the gas is not the bigger monopoly. We have a huge monopoly in agriculture, in electricity. We have a government-owned company. We have it in water. We have in almost every resource and infrastructure. We have a huge monopoly, which is, and Israeli citizens are suffering from the inefficiencies of these monopolies, and nobody make a pips on it. But when we have a possibility for a private-owned monopoly, then we see mainly left-leaning organization jumping with crying out that this is outrage. And basically, as I see it as a political battle on the free market in Israel.
Of course, it's political.
And I believe that Benjamin Netanyahu, that believe in free market, trying to move the country toward a freer market. And what we see is the backlash that went up to the Supreme Court after failing in the Knesset.
And I do want to get an idea of the scale of this project. Amnon, when you talk about developing a gas field, What exactly does that entail, and how much money are we talking about?
Well, Tamar cost around $3.5 billion to develop altogether. Leviathan probably today will be in the order of $4 billion. But it seems to me that there is no economic justification to develop Leviathan. There is no market for the gas.
And you don't believe that trade and exports is necessarily possible as well, correct?
No, it's not possible in the current prices unless Israel will sell gas, or the gas companies will sell the gas at around anywhere between 2 to 2.5 on the wellhead.
This is part
While
of the problem.
Israel pays about, Israel Electric Company pays about 5.5.
And people
So it's a
feel
huge
that-
discrepancy, and I don't think the public would like to see it.
'Cause the
But I
public
think the
feels they're
major
not
point
enough.
here is not this dissertation about the Israeli market or etc., with all due respect. It's the stability clause which the Supreme Court said about. And this is, in my opinion, is the most important in a negative way in the gas framework. And because it's blatantly anti-democratic. You cannot have regulation security. It's against democracy.
This is the Van Leer's institution position?
It's not my, it's my position.
It's your private
It's my
position.
private
Okay.
position. Van Leer
Just
has,
to make it clear.
Van Leer has no position in the gas business.
Good to hear.
It's my personal opinion. It's not only mine, it's the opinion of the major professor of legal studies in the universities.
And
They wrote
staying with
about
that-
it.
Some of them
You
do, some
cannot-
of them don't. It's
You cannot
argument.
have stability because government cannot bind itself, certainly cannot bind the next government, and certainly cannot bind the Knesset. Even
But
the
it's not the
Knesset
Knesset.
cannot bind the next Knesset, etc. So government.
Of course, the Knesset can change it.
No, I
No,
think,
but that's not security.
After 10
Let-
years.
If you
Yes.
take
No.
upon yourself, if the government take upon yourself not to change the laws, which means it circumvents the
Which
Knesset ability to change it. And this is unlawful.
Yeah,
It's
but
undemocratic.
we have to
It's
remember
the essence
that
of democracy.
we have to remember that we need to respect contract, and Israel showed a track record of breaking every
so
contract.
I think it's important
Every
for the stability
agreement.
clause.
Every
I'd like to come
country
in.
changed the tax law.
Possibly, but
Britain
we are
changed
not in
the
a
tax
position
law
to be
every
able
once,
But not in a way,
once in
it's-
2 or
it's-
3 years
No, let's,
in the last 15
Ariella,
years.
let's-
let's
just
just,
from you
because
for a
I'm
bit.
just aware that this is, for people who are interested in oil and gas, this sounds very exciting, but maybe to viewers it's not really understood. So just in terms of what was on at the High Court, there were basically 4 aspects for the High Court. There was export, the legality of invoking Clause 52, the sufficient redundancy in the system, and stability. Now, what is it about this stability clause? I was actually reading last month, there was a paper put out by the Oxford Institute for Energy Studies, which is affiliated with Oxford University in the UK, talking about these fiscal stability clauses and explaining 2 things. One is stability clauses are something the gas companies like for obvious reasons.
Yeah.
It means they don't need to worry about things changing. But it does tend to be something that only developing countries have. Because
In places
so
of
I think
development,
that,
the rules are
I haven't
changing.
finished. Amir, just one moment. So the second,
Okay.
that's the first point. I mean, Israel, we love to see ourselves as we are a developed country, an OECD country. So it's actually quite unusual. The second point is just to give a little bit of insight as to why it's so controversial at the High Court. You see, the argument is that if you have a stability clause, first of all, it's strange for Israel's profile and it's not good for the country. And the second point is that if things change in the future, there'll be another government or circumstances change, then actually the state, as a country, would have legal exposure because it would come under international law. Whereas if it goes through the Knesset, the legal claim is, then as a law, if there was any dispute in the future, it wouldn't go to the International Court. And that's my understanding of legalities. I'm not a lawyer, so maybe
that's
someone
a
will
pretty
call
good
in and
reason.
correct me.
This
But
is
that
not
is
my
why
understanding.
that is why the judges, this is the unusual move in the High Court, in the Supreme Court, they actually asked the government if they'd like to reconsider bringing it to legislation. So I think that's why the Stability Clause is so controversial. But there are, of course, other things to do with redundancy in the system and the exports and how Clause 52 was invoked. There were also there were a few petitions that came up in the Supreme Court.
It's really not a lot of people know that the stability clause is dealing with three major significant changes that the government has already done just a few years ago. First of all is the fiscal conditions that change in a Shishinsky committee, and the export quotas that change in a Tzemach committee, and market structure that already just have been the government deal with just now. So I don't want to live in a country that's changing the rules all the times because companies won't come here.
Yes, but there's no contradiction to saying that and to the suggestion of it going to the Knesset. Sorry, and you know, one thing I'd like to point out, which is also very interesting. It's a strategic point in this report. It says a fiscal regime established when oil prices were $50 per barrel may well be viewed when prices stand at $100 per barrel as simply being too generous to the industry. So you see, the oil price, things change in the industry, and this report explains. I'm from the UK. It explains how the UK multiple times. And the UK is very free market. In fact, the UK Parliament, you can see that they claim it has the most free market mechanism for gas trading in the world. And yet, the UK changes the regime. So the fiscal regime.
Most of the time, when oil prices are going down, the regime, if it's changing to a point that the regime reduce the tax in low oil prices. So you say that maybe we need to reduce the
no, I say that when the oil price is down, the gas, if you're looking at the position of the gas companies are in a weaker position. I mean, you came from a financial background, right? From the financial markets. Noble Energy, you know, most of its assets from the US and in Israel. When the oil price goes down, it's not good for the oil companies. So it's very understandable from the oil company's point of view or the gas company's point of view why they would want a stability clause. I think the reason it went to the Supreme Court is the question as to whether
because of
it's
the oil
good for
prices,
the country.
It's because the way the government and the country deals with the gas.
The Israeli regulation need to set a track, and this is also something that mentioned the state controller in his report, that the regulation regime in Israel need to be fixed, and this is part of the trying of the government to fix it. And I hope that we will get into the track to a free market in the future.
Well, I think that is a good point to end on. Unfortunately, we have run out of time, but thank you all very much for being here this morning. We could obviously debate this all day, well into sunset if we were to stay here. Thank you all so much for coming this morning.